Good evening. I call to order the regular meeting of the Lakewood City Council of March 28th, 2016. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Hall,
Here.
Wickman, Vincent,
Here.
Royball,
Here.
Harrison,
Here.
Johnson,
Here.
Shakti,
Here.
Abel,
Here.
Coop,
Here.
Franks, Gutwein. Here. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody who is in chambers this evening. Thank you for coming out and participating. Should be a good night. We have some presentations, and we will be appointing folks to different boards and commissions. I just ask that if you do have a cell phone, maybe put it on silent, and we will start right now with the Pledge of Allegiance and stop for a moment of silent prayer after. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. All right. Will the clerk please read item 4 into the record?
Item 4, proclamation, 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War.
All right. I'll ask Councilor Royball to come down with me, please. Council President Shakti.
Recognizing the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. Whereas the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War began on Memorial Day 2012 as a 13-year program to honor and give thanks to a generation of proud Americans who saw our country through one of the most challenging missions we have ever faced. And whereas by the end of the war, more than 3 million U.S. servicemen and women had been on the ground, in the air, on the rivers, and at sea within Vietnam's borders. And whereas the City of Lakewood thanks and honors veterans of the Vietnam War, including those who were held as prisoners of war or listed as missing in action for their service and sacrifice. And whereas we honor more than 58,000 patriots who sacrificed all they had and all they would ever know. And whereas we thank friends, families, and leaders who have also made sacrifices for their loved ones and supported those individuals during this conflict and in the years after returning home. Now, therefore, on behalf of the City Council and the people of the City of Lakewood, I, Adam Paul, Mayor of the City of Lakewood, Colorado, honor all of the dedicated men and women who served in the Vietnam War and their families, and hereby proclaim the year of 2016 as commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War in the City of Lakewood. Given under my hand and seal of the City of Lakewood this 20th day of March 2016, Adam Paul.
So this is quite an honor for me to be here, but Councilmember Royball has really taken this upon himself this year to do some different things for veterans. So he helped get the City of Lakewood signed up for this, and we have a couple different things that came from the Department of Defense to commemorate what we will be doing and honoring this year. And it's not really a year celebration, it's an everyday celebration for the folks who gave all for our country. And we also received a proclamation from the President of the United States, Barack Obama, that we will be hanging up in chambers or outside in the hall as well. So I'd like to, again, congratulate Councilmember Royball. He's one of our veterans on council, and there's some other events that you'll be tackling this year. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna keep this short and sweet. I say to everybody, every veteran, brothers and sisters that were in the Vietnam War, welcome home.
Thank you. All right, will the clerk please read item 5 into the record?
Item 5, proclamation, National Victims' Rights Week.
All right, is Mr. Dempsey here? Come on down. Mr. Mr. Dempsey is one of our victims advocates. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Council President Shakti.
National Crime Proclamation, National Crime Victims' Rights Week, April 10th through 16, 2016. Whereas Americans are the victims of more than 20 million crimes each year, and whereas crime can leave a lasting physical, emotional, and financial impact on people of all ages and abilities and of all economic, racial, and social backgrounds, and whereas intervening early with services that support and empower victims provides a pathway to recovery from crime and abuse, and whereas honoring the rights of victims, including the right to be heard and to be treated with fairness, dignity, and respect, and working to meet victims' needs rebuilds their trust in the criminal justice and social services systems. And whereas the victim services community has worked for decades to create an environment for victims that is safe, supportive, and effective, and whereas National Crime Victims' Rights Week theme this year is Serving Victims, Building Trust, and Restoring Hope, it celebrates the power of victims and the victims' rights movement to change the course of history and transform lives. And whereas the Lakewood Police Department Victim Assistance Unit is joining forces with victim service programs, criminal justice officials, and concerned residents throughout Lakewood, Jefferson County, and the 1st Judicial District to observe the National Crime Victims' Rights Week and Jefferson County's 23rd annual Courage Walk in honor of crime victims. Now, therefore, on behalf of the City Council and the people of the City of Lakewood, I, Adam Paul, Mayor of the City of Lakewood, Colorado, by virtue of the authority vested in me, do hereby proclaim April 10 through 16, 2016 as National Crime Victims' Rights Week in the City of Lakewood. Given under my hand and seal of the City of Lakewood this 28th day of March 2016, Adam Paul, Mayor.
Thank you, and that's a powerful proclamation, and what a meaningful unit of folks who really give their time. When you hear about a crime, you usually follow in the courts or in the newspaper the person who committed it, but there's always a victim, and these folks are there for that victim, and we really thank them for what they do.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor and City Council, I not only do this, we thank you on behalf of the Victim Assistance Unit at the Police Department, but of the nearly 5,000 victims that we served last year alone. Thank you so much for recognizing them.
Thank you. Will the clerk please read item 6 into the record?
Item 6, presentation, Jefferson County Public Health.
Chief Paletta, you're going to start with the introduction on this. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Paul, members of City Council, Kevin Paletta, Lakewood Police Chief. My sole purpose here tonight is to introduce the guest of honor, Dr. Johnson, and really put in a plug for the public health program that we have in Jefferson County. I've served on a couple of different committees with Dr. Johnson, and through my involvement with those committees, I've learned the value of a strong public health policy and practice within a county and how it can reduce crime and improve our community overall. So tonight's presentation is to give you an overview of the services that are being offered, to include a most recent service that just launched this year. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Johnson. Thanks.
Welcome, Dr. Johnson. We had you on the schedule earlier, but we're snowed out, so glad to have you tonight with the sun shining today.
Thank you, Mayor Paul and council members. It's my honor and pleasure to be here tonight to talk to you about Jefferson County Public Health Department. We are also honored now to be housed. Our headquarters now is in Lakewood. We have moved down from the Golden Site about 1.5 years ago. And it is also our honor to be the Public Health Department for the citizens of Lakewood. We are very pleased to be able to do that. I want to talk to you a little bit about what public health is, what we do, and then to focus a little bit on one of our newer programs because it has raised some eyebrows or some issues that I think folks need to be educated about. Public health is very difficult to describe. I found probably the hardest job I have had, and I'm just starting my 27th year as the director of Jefferson County Public Health Department, is to explain to elected officials what it is we do that's different from hospitals and other healthcare agencies. The way I found is almost the most memorable way to describe it, although many of my public health colleagues don't particularly like this, is public health is the sewer system of the American healthcare system. And the reason I say that is sewer systems are foundational. They actually go in before the buildings do. They're underneath. They help hold up what you have in a foundation. But they also are not seen. And public health really is never seen unless the sewage starts backing up into the bathtubs or into the dishwasher, and then you realize that it's there and that you have a problem. And that's what public health is. You don't think about us until we have an outbreak of influenza, or we have a foodborne outbreak at a restaurant or something like that, and we like to be under the radar and trying to keep things from happening so that you don't have to worry about what's happening with the public's health. Our department is broken up into 4 divisions. I'll just mention a little bit of each of those, and then I'll talk a little bit about the handout that I've given to you. But the 4 divisions that we have an administrative division, which basically does the main administrative things that any administration department does: purchasing, payroll, HR, those kinds of things. We do, however, have 2 programs in administration that are important. One of those is our vital records department, so that if you need a birth certificate or a death certificate, we are the ones that help provide those, not just for Jefferson County, but you can get them from anywhere. If you were born or had a death anywhere in the state of Colorado, you can get a birth certificate or a death certificate in our vital records department. The other program we have in administration is our emergency preparedness program, and this is a program that actually started after September 11, 2011, with federal funding when it was realized that many of the issues that were raised around September 11, particularly afterwards, with the anthrax scare and some of those issues, that public health needed to be better prepared and needed to be a part of the emergency preparedness system that we have in America. And so we have a very important program there. One of the things we have done that is probably most memorable is when the H1N1 epidemic of influenza was concerned, we had clinics in many of the schools, including many of them in Lakewood, to help people get immunized for the influenza epidemic that actually never occurred. And hopefully we had a part in keeping that from ever occurring. Second division that I'd talk about in our department is environmental health services. And the way I describe environmental health services is we have programs that try to help protect us, the people, from what's in the environment. Things like bad water, bad air, toxic waste, those kinds of things. Food that may be not good for consumption that people have eaten, trying to keep us from having any sort of impact from those things. The second part of our environmental health services is trying to protect the environment from what we as people do. Again, where our waste goes, where our toxic waste goes, those kinds of things. So we have programs that inspect our restaurants, inspect our daycares, our child care centers, tattoo parlors, a number of places where we do inspections. We also then have programs that go out, particularly in the mountains, when they are putting in sewage systems to help make sure that they are done in a way that's going to keep the water safe. Our third and largest program is what we call community health services, and this is what used to be called nursing services, and it includes our clinics, which we still do have a large clinical presence in Lakewood, where we particularly focus on things like immunizations, women's health, infants' health, immunizations, those kinds of things. A number of the handouts on the left-hand side of the packet that you have talks about our clinics and what is available there. And I could have brought 30 more handouts, but I thought that you would already probably have more than enough to read. The other programs that we have in community health services tend to focus on going to homes or going to places where we can meet with individuals and help educate them around public health, particularly new mothers who are dealing with nutrition issues, with family raising children issues. How do you keep your child safe? There is a program called the Nurse Family Partnership Program that has had media across the country talking about the fact that these kinds of programs, working with young mothers who are just now dealing with these issues, that if we can get in there and work with them, we can actually help prevent smoking rates as the children get older. We can prevent juvenile delinquency rates. We can increase graduation from high school rates. A number of positive program outcomes that come from the nurse visitation programs. So those are the ones we have in community health services. Our last division is we call health promotion. It mainly is an education program dealing with things like tobacco use, marijuana use, how do we keep people safe, and try to help keep children from using those kinds of things. We also have our Women, Infants, and Children's program in there, which is a nutritional program that deals again with young mothers and how to keep their kids healthy. They get checks that they can take to grocery stores that actually brings in about $6 million a year into Jefferson County that are used in our grocery stores to buy healthy foods for young growing families. One of the things that we've done this year that we're excited about and is on the left-hand side of your handout is put together a Jefferson County Community Health Improvement Network. We already have over 200 members from Jefferson County who are interested in working, and you'll see that there are 7 areas, or 6 areas actually, that we have work behind there in dealing with things like active living, food access, healthy beverages, health and early childhood, school wellness, and preventive care. And these 200 organizations are meeting in smaller groups. Basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to find out where do we have duplication of services with the not-for-profits and the government agencies. Are we duplicating services that we could be working together to stop that duplication? Are there areas where there are gaps in the services that we have that we can work together to help provide those services? So we're excited about the response and the number of organizations that are involved. On the right-hand side, I have some information about one of the newer programs, and this is one that needs a little bit of background. You probably have heard that heroin is really cheap right now. In fact, it's cheaper than most prescription drugs. This has led to problems across the country. One of the bigger areas, or the areas where it was identified first, was in Scott County, Indiana, which is a rural county where they have discovered over the last year that they had 140 new cases of positive HIV, and most of those also were positive for hepatitis C because of the rampant use of IV drugs in this rural county. That raised the alarm bells across the country as we began to look at what are the issues that we were facing here, particularly with this change in the type of population. It's not just the inner city, lower income people anymore that are using IV drugs. It's now spread into the rural areas and into all of the socioeconomic groups in America. So we began to look and study what was going on in Jefferson County, and the one thing that I need to tell you is we don't have good data. We really don't. We're trying to get better data. We're trying to work with other agencies that have provided services to get better data, but we don't have good data. We're trying to build the data that we have. However, we were approached by the state health department saying they had identified a network in Jefferson County, actually here in Lakewood, that was using a hotel as a center, and they were IV drug users who were sharing needles, and they had already identified in this group of 10 people 3 positive new HIV cases in Jefferson County. They asked if we could work with our Board of Health and with our community members and law enforcement agencies in Jefferson County to start what is called a syringe access program, or a syringe exchange program. 10, 15 years ago, these were very controversial, and we have found over the years that they have actually done a great deal of decreasing the harm that is done by IV drug users, both for the community and for themselves, and they tend to be not as controversial as they used to be. Still, we met with all of the agencies in the major municipalities in Jefferson County, with the law enforcement, with the district attorney, with our county attorney, before we went to the Board of Health to try to get as much information as we could about what their concerns were. We then went to the Board of Health and said we would like, under the Colorado statute, to ask the Board of Health to authorize us to begin a needle exchange program. And based on the information that we had from the law enforcement and from the other community groups that were working in this area, we have now started a program at the beginning of February. So far, we have not had very many clients. That could be a good sign. However, as we have talked to those who are providing these services in Boulder County and in Denver, we estimate that there's somewhere between 400 and probably 600 IV drug users who live in Jefferson County, and we are still trying to work with outreach. We're working with local law enforcement. We just this last week had a ride-along with one of our nurses, with one of your police officers, to go out and find out where are the areas where we might be able to have better outreach and find those who might need the services that we're providing and help to bring them in. The second, the way this program works is I think it's important for you to know, because people will be asking you questions. One of the things that this program does is it provides clean needles and clean works for those who are using IV drugs, so that they themselves will be safer, and also that they won't be sharing needles with others, because they will have access to those needles and to the works for themselves. The second thing that we do is every time they visit, we talk to them about trying to get into treatment. Are they ready to get into treatment? Are they ready to quit this lifestyle? And it has been found that these programs are actually very good at helping people get off IV drugs and get into treatment programs, and that's really one of the things we're wanting to do. The third important thing, and one of the reasons the law enforcement have been so supportive of this program, is that when somebody signs up for a program like this, they are given a card that tells the world that they are a member of this program, and they then can feel free to let both emergency personnel and law enforcement know when they are apprehended or when they are confronted that they are members, they are carrying needles, so don't pat us down because we don't want you to get needle stick injuries. It helps give them that safety, that feeling of safety, so that they can then let those who may be patting them down. And every police department we have talked to and the sheriff's department said they have had officers who have had needle stick injuries because of patting down somebody who had needles. So this is, again, trying to break down that risky behavior and that risk to the police and to the emergency personnel, because once you do get a needle stick injury, then there's a whole long protocol that you have to go through to try to make sure that you're protected and that you haven't been exposed. We think it's important that our elected officials in Jefferson County know about this. I have talked to the elected officials in Jefferson County and the county commissioners. I was a little hesitant, but actually found that some of those who I would think may not be in support of this said it's about time that we do this. We really need to be acting on the behalf of both the users and the public to try to decrease the risks in Jefferson County. We know that there are users already. I mean, we have had reports and we have found needles around even before this program started. So what we're trying to do is to decrease that also, so that they're not throwing away their needles, but they're bringing them back to us, which helps protect the children in the neighborhood. And we think that this is a good thing. It used to be that we thought some people thought this was an enabling program. The research shows that it does not increase drug use whatsoever, but it does increase safe use of drugs and actually increases moving people from drug use into treatment. So we are beginning, like I said, it's very small now. We've only had a couple of clients come in, but we're hoping to be able to build this program so that it does become another way of protecting the citizens of Jefferson County and Lakewood as we move forward. That's a very quick, very broad stroke of what we do. As I did mention, we are the public health department for the municipalities in Jefferson County, and we are your neighbors. We are right next door. If there are ever any questions you have, please feel free to call me. I put my card in the packets. For those of you who are teachers or who are very good at spelling bees, please don't read all the words on there. There is one that's misspelled. But the telephone number is correct, and I and my staff are always at your service. If there are any questions or anything we can do for you, please feel free to contact us.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Thank you for coming out. And I would say, to what you started out with, the sewer system analogy, every day, everywhere, everyone is your motto, and that's truly what you do. You're always there to serve. So we thank you for that. And I thank you for being bold and really taking that step to say, hey, we need to do this in Jefferson County, and we need to start to look at this. So thank you for doing that. It's a epidemic, and it's scary, and if we can get ahead of it now, we'll be much better off. I was looking at your presentation here, and you can see from 2000 to, I think you end in 2013, every year the amount of deaths have gone up where there's been opiates present or heroin, sometimes doubling. So we see that trend continue to go up, and you're there trying to tackle it. Where are the locations where people can participate in this exchange program?
The only place it is available right now is at our headquarters at 645 Parfett Street here in Lakewood. Until the program grows, we think that we only need one site.
Sure.
And we think that it's fairly central, and it is along public transportation, so we hope that it is used.
I think a regional approach to this is probably the best way, and I can tell you the Metro Mayor's Caucus now is starting to look at this as well. So there's a lot of different partnerships and different community organizations trying to work together to try to affect change. So there's a couple other questions here. I'll start with Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. It was a great presentation. I personally know that people are throwing these syringes out of their cars. I have property on 14th, and in front of the house, we've got an irrigation ditch. When I've cleaned it, I've come up with 3 TB needles. So I know it's happening. I do have a question. You were talking about drug users having a card so that when they're apprehended, they can say, "Don't pat me down." Is there any concern about that being gamed at all?
Thank you, Councilman Johnson. Let me address both of your points. The first one is one of the things that we're trying to do to decrease the throwing away of needles is that they need to bring the needles back to get new needles. And so we're trying to make sure that that's what the exchange is about. It's not necessarily a one-for-one, but to encourage that they bring them back instead of throwing them away and throwing them on those kinds of sites. I'm sorry, remind me what your second question was.
I guess the question has come up regarding
Gaming the cards.
Gaming it, that somebody won't get patted down because not so much of needles, but something else they've got on their body.
You know, I'm old enough now that I have learned that people can game almost anything, so I'm sure that there is somebody who can probably game this. But basically what this card says is it says they are a registered member of the Needle Exchange Program or Syringe Access Program at Jefferson County. That helps to keep some of the legal ramifications that, and I didn't put in all of the statutes that talk about this, but over the last 3 or 4 years, the legislature has expanded the safety measures for members of needle exchange programs so that they don't feel as threatened to let somebody know that they are using IV drugs and that they are carrying IV drugs. It is basically to keep, like I said, emergency personnel and law enforcement safe so that they don't pat them down or stick themselves as they're dealing with these. I'm not sure how someone would game that, but I suppose it's possible. These people are getting their drugs anyway, that we're not giving the drugs at all. We're not, and I'm not sure how having a card would help them in that way at all. It's mainly to try to help decrease the exposure that our public servants have as they deal with these individuals. But as I said, I'm sure somebody can figure out a way to do something with these that was not intended, although the fact that Boulder has had a program for almost 28 years and Denver has had a program now for 5 or 6 years, I believe, they have not reported any way that people are abusing these cards or misusing these programs that we have identified.
It just seems odd that you'd have a syringe on your body where the needle isn't protected and covered. I'm trying to
I find that unusual too. However, as you and I, as healthcare providers, know how we need to cover those needles or make sure that they're put somewhere where they're safe, these people don't always think about that quite so actively as perhaps we might. And as I mentioned, all of our community law enforcement agencies said they have had somebody who has poked themselves with a needle because of these kinds of arrests or encounters.
Thank you. Good luck with it.
Thank you very much, and thank you.
Council President Shakti.
Just a quick question. I wonder, do you know why the price of heroin is going down? Maybe it's a long question, I don't know.
I don't know all the economics about heroin. I do know that much of the drug use has moved towards prescription drugs, and I put a couple slides in there or handouts that talk about that. And as people have moved, it's sort of the law of supply and demand, I think, that as they've moved to that, the price of heroin has come down because they need to compete with all of, it's much easier to steal things out of your parents or out of somebody's medicine cabinet or to get a prescription. And so it's kind of the law of demand, a law of supply and demand as I understand it. And heroin is, the supply of heroin has gone up dramatically. I'm not sure if it has to do with the stabilization of what's going on in Afghanistan and all of that. It's beyond my economic abilities to understand. All I know is it's getting cheaper and cheaper, and it's much cheaper than oxycodone or oxymorphone or some of the prescription drugs on the street now.
And I would say Frontline just did a really interesting 2-hour documentary within the last month and a half. So if you have an interest and you want to kind of learn more about this and what's going on, it was fascinating. And it talked about how they started to restrict the use of opiates because they've been overprescribed, and the drug cartels caught wind of that and were able to start penetrating cheap heroin into the United States to then supplement that, and it's just caused an explosion. So it's a recent Frontline. Councilmember Wickman.
I wanted to start off with congratulating a great program. I saw the same program on Frontline, which leads me to my question. And this is just a symptom. In the long term, addiction is a problem. Now, you made mention that when they come to you, you encourage them to go for treatment. So my question is, do we have adequate treatments, services available, rehabilitation out there?
That would depend on your definition of adequate. We do not, in this country or in this state or in this city or in this county, have enough programs for substance abuse to deal with the issues that are there. So no, we probably do not have adequate. There are, however, some programs that we can refer to that will take clients. We don't have a huge number that we've been referring yet or that we anticipate will be referring. But I personally believe that the solution to this problem is not regulation and enforcement. It is prevention and treatment, and we do not have enough treatment in this country to deal with the issue, I think, adequately at this time.
Can you think of anything where the city might be able to help?
You know, I would certainly be willing to study that with you and see if there's a way we can come up with that. Again, the economics of treatment centers is also another world of its own. And we did have a treatment program for a while, but we actually had to close it due to financial problems in the county a few years ago. We tried to find other agencies that would be able to step up, and actually Jefferson Center for Mental Health has increased their substance abuse response. Some of the others we're still working with, but I don't know exactly what Lakewood could do to help that. I guess one of the things that could be helpful, and that is if we could all work together to try to decrease the stigma of those who are addicted to drugs and the stigma of having a treatment center in your neighborhood or near your neighborhood. That is always a problem when somebody wants to put in a treatment center. Is there's usually a pushback that can be very violent, or well, not violent, but very, very emotional.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you again. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time and all that you do.
Come back anytime.
Thank you.
So going from the heavy stuff to maybe some fun stuff, we're going to do appointments. So our next resolution, our next 6 resolutions will be appointments. And will the clerk please read item 7 into the
Item 7, Resolution 2016-12, appointing a member to the Lakewood Planning Commission.
And I will turn this over to our screening committee chairwoman, Councilor Harrison.
Thank you. You know, as screening committee, you need to know kind of what we are. There's one member of each of the 5 wards that serves on the screening committee, and we get the opportunity of meeting wonderful people. We get the opportunity to sit and visit with each of these people that we'll be appointing tonight, talking with them about the job that they are volunteering for, and interviewing them and really getting to meet some wonderful people. Tonight, we have 6 different appointments that we'll be making. The first one is Resolution 2016-12, the Lakewood Planning Commission appointment of Glinda Sinks. Glinda, would you stand up and wave at us? We are very thrilled. She's representing Ward 1, and I move that we pass this resolution.
I second.
There's a motion and a second. Thank you for your willingness to serve. And before we vote, could you please tell us who's on your committee?
Yes, I can. Our Mayor Pro Tem, Ramey Johnson, Scott Coop from Ward 2, Barb Franks from Ward 4, Shakti from Ward 3, and
you.
Sharon from Ward 2.
You got them all.
I got them all? We have way too many committees. Okay, we're thrilled.
Did you have a comment on this? Okay.
This is sort of for all the different appointments. Barb spoke in the other meeting about, meeting a couple weeks ago about how qualified people were. And I just want to echo that it was amazing how qualified people were, to the extent that sometimes where we had only a limited number of openings, it felt really pretty absurd to have to choose between some of the people. So that's a great place to be in.
Okay. Let's start voting. And that carries 11 ayes, 0 nays. Welcome aboard. Will the clerk please read item 8?
Item 8, Resolution 2016-13, appointing members to the Lakewood Judicial Review Commission.
Mr. Mayor, I move we approve Resolution 2016-13, which would appoint Michelle Tovray. Do you remember that name? Like Chief Tovray, would that be a better way of saying it? Those of you who are just kind of figuring out who that is, Chief Tovray is now the chief of Cherry Hills Village, right? But served and learned how to do the job correctly in Lakewood. So even though we graduated her to Cherry Hills Village, we call her our own, and she still lives here in Lakewood. We'll also be appointing, I hope, Dana Shea Reed. Dana, where are you? There you are. If you would stand for us, please. And also Rhonda Diaz. Are you here, Rhonda? I didn't see her come in. Okay, so those are the 3 for the Lakewood Judicial Review Commission. I'd move that we approve them for their terms.
I second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Any comments? Please cast your votes. And that carries 11 ayes, 0 nays. Welcome aboard. The clerk please read item 9 into the record.
Item 9, Resolution 2016-14, appointing a member to the Lakewood Board of Appeals.
I move that we approve Resolution 2016-14, appointing Donaldo Visani as a member of the Lakewood Board of Appeals. Donaldo, would you stand up? Thank you very much. Now, Board of Appeals, let me kind of tell you a little bit about what this is. When there is a situation where you want to appeal a ruling of the Planning Commission, he's the man, and a few others that you would want to talk. No, you don't talk with, but he would be the people, the committee that would do that. It takes a little bit of experience in the building community, and Donaldo has that. So we're thrilled to have you. I move to approve.
I second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Any comments? With that, please cast your votes. And this is great. And that carries 11 ayes, 0 nays. Welcome. The clerk please read item 10.
Item 10, Resolution 2016-15, appointing a member to the Lakewood Victim Assistance Compensation Board.
Mr. Mayor, this is, I move to approve Resolution 2016-15, appointing Mavis McFalls to the Lakewood Victim Assistance Compensation. Mavis has the heart of gold, and we are so thrilled that she might be part of it. There she is in the back. She's sitting way back there. She's going to make a tremendous addition to this board, and we're thrilled to have her. I move to approve.
I second.
Motion and a second. Any comments? All right, please cast your votes. We're just getting along great tonight. Carries 11 ayes, 0 nays. Will the clerk please read item 11 into the record?
Item 11, Resolution 2016-16, appointing members to the Lakewood Advisory Commission for an Inclusive Community.
Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve Resolution 2016-16, appointing 3 new members to the Lakewood Advisory Commission for Inclusive Community. They are Gino Furzy. Gino, are you? There you are. Okay, stand up. And Mila Ferguson. Mila, there you are. And Joseph McHatton. Joseph, thank you. Also known as Joe, but we're thrilled to have you here. These are also going to make excellent additions to the Advisory Commission. Move to approve.
I second.
There's a motion and a second. Any comments, questions? Please cast your votes. And I have a feeling I know how this is going to go. 11 ayes, 0 nays. Carries. Welcome. The clerk please read item 12 into the record.
Item 12, Resolution 2016-17, appointing and reappointing members to the Lakewood Historic Preservation Commission.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve Resolution 2016-17, appointing a new member to the commission, which would be Nicole Lane. Nicole, there you are. And reappointing James Havey. Sorry, James, if you would also stand up. We're thrilled to have those. And what Councilor Shakti talked about, the people that we interviewed for historic preservation. Oh my gosh, the qualifications we had in this group was absolutely tremendous, and we're so thrilled, and it was such a hard decision, but we're thrilled to have you. Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. Councilor Vincent, you would like to speak.
Yes, of course I would. I was a member of the Historical Commission, and the people that have been on that have been so terrific. And I think it was exciting that we actually had to appoint another member. And I think that you all are going to be very, very busy, which I'm really excited about. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, a motion and a second. Oh, do you want to speak again?
No.
Okay. Okay. Please cast your votes. It's unanimous. 11 ayes, 0 nays. Welcome. So, thank you, Councilor Harrison, for that summary, and thank you to all the folks who came out tonight. Your willingness to serve, that's what makes Lakewood such a great community, is that we have folks who care. They want to be a part of it. I'd also like to thank the folks that are coming off from serving as well. Thank you for giving your time to the city of Lakewood and trying to make it a better place. So thank you. Please read item 13.
Item 13 is actually public comment.
There we go. Public comment. So we have a roster in the back. We have 2 names that have signed up. You're more than welcome to speak on any non-agenda item. You'll have 3 minutes at the podium. The light is green. When you have 30 seconds left, it will turn yellow, and when you're done, it's red. And I'll try to give you this. And if you want to keep going, we'll probably get a little bit more aggressive with that. But please come tell us anything you'd like to talk about. First on the list tonight is Mr. Newt Vaughn. Mr. Vaughn, welcome. I think this is maybe 4 weeks in a row.
Yeah, 10-4. My name's Newt Vaughn. I'm from Ward 5. The last meeting, there was an approval for a city attorney. And that city attorney asked for a change, a name change, and then he also asked for a 5-year extension on his contract. I think it was appropriate to approve the name change, but not the 5-year extension. I think there was entirely too much time spent discussing that issue. I think the contract should have been rewritten for the next 5 years and approved through the end of the contract. I don't think there should have been a lot of discussion about just changing the name. And I think that a city attorney should not be writing his own contract. I think you ought to appoint a commission to look into that and find someone to write the contract and then be approved by both the city attorney and this council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Mr. Mace, come on down. Take your time.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members, Janet Smith, Ward 2. I am here tonight regarding a letter that I received from the police department this morning in the mail. This letter states that there is a violent registered sex offender moving into my area, and I would like to know, since Chief Paletto is here, Mayor, if you can do me a favor, or anybody can do me a favor, and ask the chief if the letter goes out before they come out of jail or after they're out of jail, because my neighbors and I would like to be educated about this. My neighbors are asking me, because I am normally in these meetings constantly, to get clarification, and I am greatly hoping the chief can shed some light on this, because I'm confused myself. So, and I talked to Commander Hebner, or tried to get a hold of Commander Pat Hebner this morning, and no luck. So I am requesting, just for clarification purposes, if, Mayor, if you can bring the chief up, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Mr. Mace, and we'll finish up public comment and see if, I know that Chief Paletto left, but we might be able to get you an answer, and if not, we can get Commander Hebner to get you an answer right away tomorrow. Anybody else for public comment? All right, with that, I will close public comment. Ms. Hodson, do you have somebody from the PD that can speak to that, or do we?
You know we don't, and I want to be perfectly accurate, so we'll have Commander Hefner respond to that tomorrow.
Is that okay, Mr. Mace? All right, thank you, sir. All right, next up we have the consent agenda. The consent agenda has been made to expedite council action. It contains both resolutions and first reading ordinances, which this does not. The only thing on this is accepting minutes of the boards and commissions. So I'll ask the clerk to please read item 14 into the record.
Item 14, the consent agenda is acceptance of the minutes of the boards and commissions, Advisory Commission for an Inclusive Community Executive Committee meeting minutes of February 3rd, 2016, their full commission meeting minutes of February 17th, 2016, and the Lakewood Planning Commission meeting minutes of November 18th, 2015.
Thank you. Can I have a motion, please?
Mayor Paul, I move for acceptance of the minutes of boards and commissions, all of which are included in the consent agenda items introduced into the record by the city clerk.
I second.
There's a motion and a second. Any council comments or questions on the minutes? Seeing none, please cast your vote. And that carries 11 ayes, 0 nays. So we have nothing on second reading. We have item 15, general business. And this is a presentation we've been waiting to see for some time. A lot of excitement here. So Nanette Nealon, our Deputy City Manager, will come up and get us going. Good evening.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. I'll wait for the screen. Tonight's presentation is purpose is not for any decisions, but to provide background on some ongoing efforts that the city and the community have been involved with at bringing affordable workforce housing for artists in the Lamar Station area. Okay. And the purpose of this is to bring everybody up to speed and be on the same page. So as we move forward, there can be a consensus of how to move forward in future agenda items. Yeah. So let me go back to 2013. We became involved with looking at artist housing through the Denver Regional Council of Government had a Sustainable Communities Initiative ongoing. And as part of that, they had an offer for in-kind services that they paid for to bring art space out to our community and for them to do a preliminary feasibility study to determine the viability for artists for an artist housing project. And it was particularly all their efforts were around a light rail corridor. That's when we became aware that art space has a kind of a consistent six-step process to determine whether the path of a project is feasible in any community. And they're here today to kind of present this also to you. But the first step was the preliminary feasibility, and that was the element that we were funded by DRCOG. The second step is an arts market study that we have completed, and I will talk to you about that. And then we have a letter of an agreement for the next three elements. They were the pre-development phases 1, 2, and 3. And the last element, if you are successful in the first 5, is that there's a construction of artist housing in your community. On the preliminary feasibility findings that were done in 2013, there was a city council presentation in February of 2014. And the findings that were in that preliminary feasibility included, they found 3 defined goals for the successful Lakewood project. One, they were aware West Colfax Avenue had an opportunity for revitalization. They also saw the kind of very active initial efforts and very successful continued efforts of the 40 West in establishing a permanent population of artists in the 40 West district. And lastly, the opportunity for a Lamar Street Station TOD planning effort to further in those efforts. And the one quote that came out of it, the project concept is viable, good sites exist within a quarter mile of the Lamar Street Station. With that, we moved on and funded for about $40,000, and about $35,000 of that came from the Economic Development Fund, and the other $5,000 came from 40 West efforts, and their in-kind efforts supplemented that. That was a survey that went out in a 50-mile radius to all artists and artist organizations. And the results of that from 438 survey participants said there was a definitive need for the variety of spaces that art space provides in their design. And that included the artists organizations, and any creative businesses, and they'll later identify some of their definition. So their recommendation was that we continue to move on and embark on a new project to serve both the local artists and knew that there was a high probability that we draw others into the area. One of the things that they look at is what's the viability, that how many units would go into such a complex. And they've looked at it and kind of ascertained that there'd be 56 new affordable live-work units that could be filled, and then 33 additional studio and creative workspaces. From that efforts, there was, City Council had some education and then further some direction. The education was held at 40 West offices on December 1st, 2014, and it was one of the first exposures that all of City Council had to ArtSpace, the company, the business itself, the nonprofit, and their Senior Vice President, Wendy Holmes, came and presented and kind of discussed, and ArtSpace is here today to present more about their organization. On December 8th, that following week, City Council provided direction that staff enter into some negotiations for the next, those phases 3, 4, and 5, to explore the viability, identify potential partners that may work with this artist housing, and come back to City Council. Our negotiations were founded in that from December 2014 to 2015, and we set up a framework for those negotiations. One, as we said before, was we explore partnerships. 2, we would maximize success such that once we start, we would like to maximize the success for project completion. A third element was that we limit and minimize use of city funds. And the last, identify any cost savings in the ArtSpace process. Staff came back after their negotiations, and we did explore partnerships. One of those partnerships was Metro West Housing. We were in discussions with them, either from a management component or from a site component, and I'll get to the culmination of that. We identified some sites. ArtSpace, when they came in for their preliminary findings, explored multiple sites along the whole West Colfax, West Line corridor. And so I don't remember the exact number, but I was going to say it's well over 20, I believe. The minimize and cap use of city funds, one of the things is we saw this as an economic development opportunity. Housing, appropriate housing for workforce is an economic development opportunity. So we suggested that we use economic development funds, set up a contract that would clearly identify the use of the city funding and to what extent, and that we were very clear that there was no intention of funding anything during the construction process. The cost savings, their original proposal to us was that their standard fee is $750,000, and because of the number of sites that we could limit it to and limit their homework that they needed to do, and through other mechanisms, that fee was reduced to $600,000. The results of that contract negotiation with the city staff resulted in us proposing a letter of an agreement to City Council, and it looked like 3 phases for a total value of $600,000 from the Economic Development Fund. The first was the due diligence limited it to 2 sites. The Lamar Street Crossing, which is owned by Metro West Housing, had a phase 2 component to it. And if they could pursue that and see if that was a reasonable alternative to have artist housing. The second site was a city-owned parcel that we obtained and bought for the purpose of doing stormwater improvements when the West Line corridor was under construction. We purchased that, and there was an excess remainder, and that was 1290 Harland. And that had funded, economic development had acquired that with some funds from the stormwater fund also. And then the other element of it was that we set up the next 2 phases with the design and financial analysis, and including fundraising that ArtSpace would undertake. And it culminates in an ask for a CHAPA, tax credit application, that we were hoping that would be submitted this year. So to recap that path, when I showed you the 6 steps, the highlighted yellow steps, pre-development 1, pre-development 2, and pre-development 3, were what we proposed to City Council at that time, and it kind of estimated what would be in the letter of agreement and the timeframes that would be undertaken. On April 13th of 2015, through an ordinance, City Council approved unanimously, 11-0, that the execution of the letter of agreement went through, that authorized the city manager to execute on behalf of the staff. And And it also allocated the $600,000 from the Economic Development Fund. So there's no additional money. We've allocated the dollars already for this project. With that, I've asked ArtSpace. They are here. They are from Minnesota. They flew in, got here around 4 o'clock today. And they will go through more about ArtSpace in general, the projects that they have around, and lastly, their efforts to date on the work they've provided under our letter of agreement. So I'm going to introduce Will, who's the Chief Operating Officer, and Rachel, who's their Director of Property Development, and I believe Rachel is going to make the formal presentation to you. Thank you.
Welcome, Rachel and Will. A bit nicer weather down this way.
It is much nicer. Well, good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you, Nanette, for introducing us and getting us this far, helping with the history. My name is Rachel Robinson, and I am Director of Property Development with ArtSpace. And like some of you, I am somewhat new. I've been based in Minnesota for quite a long time working in real estate development, but joined ArtSpace at the end of this past summer. So if I get stuck, Will is here. He'll help me. Will Law is ArtSpace's Chief Operating Officer. And our goal today, and I'll make sure I can actually flip through these, is to kind of recalibrate, get grounded. Many of you were here and many of you were not when we last gave kind of an update overview presentation on who we are, what we do, and why we're here. So we will breeze through some of this because it could get a little long. The idea is more just to have a little fun, start a dialogue, and give you the opportunity to ask us any questions that might come up along the way. We are, of course, a nonprofit organization. We are a national organization based on our mission to create, foster, and preserve affordable space for artists and arts organizations. We have a long history starting in 1979, and we are a leader. We are invited into communities to make change and to make affordable spaces for artists across the country. Make sure that's right. Okay. We have a broad portfolio that's been created over the years and through a lot of experience in what artists need and what artists can do for communities. And now we have 1,500 affordable live-work spaces. We have commercial space. We have theater and creative space. And these next few slides are really more about the images, just to show you as many images as possible of our very exceptional, very unique portfolio of real estate. Every single one of these developments came out of listening and conversations in a community about their needs and their cultural assets. So that includes historic preservation. That opportunity may not be here for us at this moment, but this is a big part of what we do, and this is a transformational space on the slide here. New construction, and this is certainly a great example here of some very dense urban new construction that fits into the fabric of the community. Same with this sort of infill development. On this slide, all very unique, all very responsive to that community and their needs. In all of our spaces, we do carve out the community space that is for the artists and the residents in a live-work space, but also for the community. This is much over and above with community space, so that there's gallery, exhibition space, educational space. And the hallmark being our live-work spaces. These are apartment units that range from efficiency to 3-bedroom and truly have space within someone's home for both living and working. And it's fun to see always how people use these spaces when living and working in them. I've had quite a few opportunities since joining ArtSpace, and hopefully all of you will have that opportunity as well to see our spaces in action, where we have people who have made that space, whether they're a poet or visual artist, to carve it out, living room, bedroom, side of the kitchen. They make it work, and it's really fun to see how people do that. I think I skipped. It's very sensitive. All right. We also have, and it looks like I skipped just a couple slides, but that is fine. Community space for gathering and exhibitions. That's both within our live work units and within other types of spaces. Just plain working studios, where it is not a live work situation, but a professional working space for artists. Commercial space, that this example is a restaurant, and we range in pretty small size to up to a pretty large size of commercial pod for that kind of work, to our very large performance and exhibition spaces. And all of these meet community goals, and all of them accomplish our mission across the country. So, sort of in the live work framework, we have years and years of experience in what artists need, and we build that into every development. That's the larger space, the larger windows, thinking about the common areas, thinking about the functionality, the durability of spaces so that they're truly workspaces. And they make our spaces very unique. And who are these artists? It's not an exclusive list at all, what we've shown here, but not simply talking visual artists, also educators, musicians, and this is just a short list of true examples across the art space community of artists who are living and working in our spaces. And it's a large and varying portfolio with an overwhelming demand. We have families, singles, people of all ages, children who live in our communities and make them unique. And then who are these artists? I think this is sort of getting into the core of who we are. What we do is about the opportunities for people who are working as artists, living as artists, but also likely working another job, to have a workforce housing opportunity that truly gives them space to both work and make their craft, well, it's affordable so that they continue to have other jobs. And we are very proud of the work that we do to allow artists to collaborate with others in their community, to open up their space to the broader public, to be able to professionalize their work. And you know, the art is not judged, but we are certainly serving across our portfolio people who have a deep commitment to their craft and their work. This is a fun project. This is what happens when we're a little further along here, but this is a groundbreaking, and it's a good place to be. And it's kind of a segue into how do we get there? What do we do? What are the aspects of our organization? We have three kind of main functions that are highlighted here: consulting, property development, and asset management. You've been working with our consulting group, that is Wendy Holmes, and they provide the feasibility work, the market study work, the empirical research around how communities can look at their cultural identity, their cultural assets, and turn that into a next path. And then this is me, and this is what I do, is the property development. It's real estate development. It's very fun real estate development. I do everything from site assessment and selection to assembling financing, closing the financing, and overseeing the construction. At ArtSpace, we have a very unique component, which is our asset management. As a national organization that owns our assets in perpetuity, we have a team of people who are very uniquely trained to continue that community presence in the cities where we're working, to make sure the artists are really catalyzing their work and are participating in public events, are getting together to have a good gallery show. And it's something that we do for the life of these projects, that we work with on the kind of the day-to-day property management, all the paperwork and the rent collection and just the maintenance that needs to happen with local property managers. It's been a very successful path, and in this case, we know that Metro West Housing Services provides an excellent service in property management, and we have talked to them about a hopeful partnership here. This slide is very general. This isn't your project. This is just kind of a how does it all come together slide about financing affordable housing developments and live workspaces for artists. Lots of sources, and so it's a complicated, but something we do well, and we've done 50 times, so we know how to do it, and that's a service that we bring. Kind of what else do we offer these communities? What did Lakewood see in us when we started down this path? some of the attributes, just this is kind of across our portfolio, what do we do that's special? And certainly, I know one of the goals in this community and the establish and preserve a community's creative identity with the 40 West Arts District has been critical to this process. And this work is also economic development. Certainly, you guys have seen that in us as well. It's about creative and arts development. It's about a property that is the community's asset, that is a stop on your art walk, that is a landmark in your community that people know by name as the Art Space building, where the artists work and where they show their work and where you're invited to participate. And we get there through a lot of community engagement. We, like I mentioned at the beginning, are generating these communities out of listening and understanding who you are, and each does work out to be very unique. Nanette grabbed these slides, so I won't run back through them, but I did want to show these are regurgitated from the old presentation that some of you would have seen when it last came through. But some of the graphics just reinforce that market demand and the artists who are already living, working, or aspiring to live and work in Lakewood, in both the Artist Live workspaces and studio spaces. On the next view, I did just sort of advance the 1290 Harlan Street to just bring kind of what I know about the site and what I can display about the site at this point in the assessment process, with a bit of a map here showing the location, with the light rail running there west to east, and the site being that southeast corner of the main intersection there. After the Dry Gulch improvements, and we've met with engineering, they've been incredibly helpful, and the culvert improvements that run under Harlan, there's about 0.9 acres, almost an acre of site that is that buildable area. And this graphic we created, it's not an official plat or anything, but you can see it's the southern portion of the site, after the northern portion of the site is used for the Dry Gulch and the western for the culvert that runs sort of at an angle under the street. That the remaining buildable portion is about an acre. And this is our architect worked up just what we call a massing diagram that shows sort of what would a 4-story building sort of the footprint size that fits with the zoning as we kind of know it. It would be a lot more review from this point forward, but with the zoning, site access, stormwater management, parking, what does that building look like in context of the neighborhood? And with a very simple, and I'll toggle between these, showing that here, if you're looking at Harlan and the access goes along here, then you have the 4-story building with significant ceiling height, so it is a little taller than other 4 stories. And here with Harlan being this street, kind of showing again how these are the improvements, the public-owned improvements, then this would be parking and stormwater management and landscape. So I will stop there. We can always come back and kind of pause on a map of Art Space, just as a reminder that we are very national and that we've worked in a lot of communities, and we're very excited to be working here in Lakewood, moving into these next steps. And Nanette, I think, had one more thing. Yeah.
So with that, that's a quick snapshot on where we are in the process. So there's no action requested tonight. It was only an update. But just a future of looking forward is we're working with Art Space. They're in the process of giving us a draft summary. That draft summary, as you got highlights today, is indicating that 1290 Harlan, the city-owned site, is the site that probably be advancing in the process. They're going to prepare the site evaluation report, unless we hear some things in the upcoming weeks. They're still working on the current design that just came forward last week. So we'll be working through with our staff to say, how does that building look and work on this site? So it's like starting into our pre-consultation phase. And if since 1290 is becoming the preferred site, that's going to entail some future discussions that will involve City Council. The acquisition of property comes underneath the purview of City Council. That discussion will have most likely some direction to your negotiators, staff here from you as City Council. And once we feel comfortable, then we will culminate in an ordinance. And once that is, we're still working on timing. The CHAFA application has a requirement that they must have site control, and that will dictate when we can move forward with the CHAFA application. So with that, the three of us are here to see if there's any questions and answers and updates or maybe further information in the future that you would like, and we'd be happy to provide.
Thank you, Nanette, Rachel, Will. I think last time you were here, you saw a groundswell of community support that kind of ran from 40 West Arts to Two Creeks Organization to the West Colfax Community Association. And we had a First Friday event in the Arts District a couple weeks ago, and if it was any indication of the interest in this area, it proves that those numbers that you had in your metric of people who are interested, the creatives who are interested in this area, is spot on. So I know there's going to be a couple questions, and there's not an ask for action tonight. And I just want to remind folks that this process did start some years ago with Dr. Cog, and I think Rachel mentioned that this is a group of folks that have to be invited into your community. And so they were invited into the city of Lakewood and have done a lot of things, and we look forward to the future and seeing what happens. I support this project. I was one of the 11 who supported it last time. I continue to support it and look forward to see how it rolls out. So I will start with Councilor Coop, please.
Thanks for coming back and giving us the update. Nanette, or somebody from ArtSpace, can you tell us why 1290 has risen to the top?
I'm going to let our consultants, as that was part of their first phase assessment, and let them discuss that a bit.
Okay.
There were two sites identified after the work ahead of the contract. And so the two sites were the 1290 Harlan and then the site that's identified for Lamar Station Crossing Phase 2 to be developed by Metro West Housing Services. So we have had a great dialogue with them, and I don't want to over-represent their goals or incorrectly represent their goals, but they had put quite a bit of effort, and I personally know what this effort feels and looks like into an application for housing development, had full concept, and had put it in once to CHAFA, and they will go forward and advance that. They have a great project that's gotten great feedback, so they will move that forward, and it just wasn't the right opportunity to combine that with an artist live work. It is an opportunity to increase the population and to continue to move with redevelopment of the area south of the light rail near the Lamar Station Crossing. So we'll continue to look for that great feedback from CHAFA, and it'll simply be an increase in the overall development activity.
Great, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson. Oh, did you have a follow-up?
No, not a separate question? You want to come back to that?
Yes, quick on the trigger. My apologies, sir.
That's all right. The keeping the affordable side of it, I'm just going to throw out a possibility there. Okay, an artist comes in on the ground floor, the art catches on, starts making some money. How does that work as their income escalates? How do they stay in place?
There's a requalification process, if that makes sense, or a recertification is a better way to describe it, that all the residents will undertake every year. And what that really does is it sort of recerts their income. Federal law that governs this does not require that if they make more money that they have to move out per se. It's not like Section 8 where you lose your voucher and something changes. The real intent of this program is to create kind of a, what's the best way to describe it, kind of a portfolio of reasonably affordable workforce housing. And people can move in and take advantage of that to improve their life circumstances and potentially advance their financial position. What most of the statistics that bear out that have studied this is that when people, whether it's artists in our community, which by the way it's the same, or it's the general population that often takes advantage of affordable housing like this, if their personal income dynamics improve to the place where they now have an option to buy a condominium or purchase a house or do any of these other things that we typically all understand as part of the American dream, they tend to do that. So we really don't have a situation, generally speaking, in affordable housing that's financed in this way, where people just sort of stay there indefinitely forever because it's a good deal, in spite of their sort of maybe escalating financial opportunities. They make the choices that many of us, if we think about it logically, would. They embark upon families, and they look for houses or other kind of ways to use their equity to kind of improve their circumstances. So there's fairly natural turnover that happens. When those spaces become available then, when people move out under these circumstances, they're always released to people that qualify for affordable housing. So there's kind of a cyclical sort of self-correction, and it continues to sort of repeatedly serve the mission of giving people an opportunity to kind of advance their life circumstance. Did that answer the question?
Yes, it does. In your experience with other projects that are already operating, do these people tend to stay in the area? Do they move on?
They almost always do. We did some real close studies of this on a couple of our earliest Minnesota projects, and what we discovered is two things. In juxtaposition of what I just said, we interestingly have a slightly higher residency rate than affordable housing, than home ownership does in most of the communities we work in. So usually home ownership, I think the average is 6 or 7 years nationally. Varies a little from community to community. The people will stay in a home before they sell and transition. We'll often have people that stay in our buildings. Now, I'm not speaking about general affordable housing here. I'm really talking about ArtSpace's portfolio. A little longer than that. I think our averages when we've done those statistics have been in the 7 to 8 year range. What we discovered, though, when we did some studies on our first 2 projects in Minneapolis is that those that did move stayed within a mile radius of our project. And I think it had a lot, and we've done some testing of that, and what we've discovered is it really has a lot to do with the relationships with the artist community in particular that they made while living in the building. So while they maybe decided it'd be great to have a house now with a bigger yard because they now have 2 kids and a dog, and they still don't want to lose that connectivity to that arts community that they've invested in now, in many cases, 8, 9, 10 years. So they don't go very far, typically, is what we've discovered. They usually find opportunities that are pretty close by, and they usually stay pretty engaged with that artist community and the events that artist community both sponsors and participates in.
Very cool. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. I really appreciate this nice presentation and that you'd come back to Denver to update. We have a lot of new members on City Council, and I want them to understand this very clearly, what we're getting involved in. There were some things, frankly, that for me, the first time I wasn't very comfortable with. Yeah. We, as a city, have committed $600,000 towards this. How much has been spent so far of that?
We've paid ArtSpace $175,000 to date.
Okay. And the money that we pay goes towards ArtSpace for the preliminary siting and due diligence, right?
That and including the architect work, and then the kind of the siting of the building on the site and looking at the specific site design.
Okay. Sure.
Typically in those contracts, about 2/3 go to 2/3 of that 200, so 400,000 will go to third-party contractors, architects, engineers, surveyors, environmental groups that do our testing. So that funnels through us is part of the due diligence to advance the project. And about 1/3 of it typically stays with ArtSpace for our internal costs with regard to putting together financing and managing that scope of work.
Oh, good. Thank you. Okay. It's my understanding that there are about 5 sites in Colorado that are looking at this type of development. Is that right?
Yep, we have a completed project in Loveland, Colorado. Adjacent to that is a historic building that we're looking at. It'd be not housing, so it'd be very different from this, different kind of finance. But it is something, it's the old Feed and Grain building, for those of you that are familiar. It's adjacent to the construction housing project that we did, and we'll be working on a scenario to create kind of an incubator for creative businesses in that space. We are also involved in this statewide initiative that is often referred to as Space to Create. I don't know if you've heard that term or not, but it's a rural initiative to do smaller scale artist housing facility spaces. Spaces around the country, and so there, in particular, in that project, it's conceived that we maybe do as many as 9 projects, but they're kind of smaller. The vision is they might be, 5 to maybe 20 units of workforce housing for artists and their families, and then some arts, commercial or facility space for local arts groups. And a lot of this will be on, old main streets in small towns around the state to help kind of revitalize those main streets. So these are kind of smaller boutique projects. And we're doing, the very first one that you may hear about is in Trinidad, and that's a pilot project. So we're working with DOLA, and we're working with CHAFA, a couple of large foundations here in the state to try to sort of see if this is a viable project. We're going to kind of test it out in Trinidad. So you'll hear talk of our work in Trinidad. Beyond that, there is this project that we're obviously working on. And then there's an ongoing dialogue in Denver, but there's not a project per se in Denver, but there is some foundation support for us to potentially look at some project opportunities in Denver. It's a little further along, downstream in terms of what might happen there, but there are conversations there. I think that was the case when we were here talking last time as well. Did I leave anything out?
Oh, consulting otherwise.
And then there's always some ongoing consulting. So, there'll be our consulting team, Wendy's team. I know we've had some conversations with the city of Aurora about some of their aspirations with regard to art and cultural development. I know there's been some conversations with some foundations, not the city, but in Colorado Springs, for example. And I know there's been some conversations up in Fort Lauderdale, sorry. It's where my mother-in-law lives. But in Fort Collins as well, about some of their aspirational hopes. But none of that's real yet. Those are early conversations. Again, we're kind of in the community engagement phase, talking about what maybe they would like to see happen, how could we maybe help them with those goals. But we haven't executed any other pre-development contracts, if that's the question.
Could you please speak to the amount of money that Loveland has actually put out in this? I've heard different figures, and I'd like to hear from you. Yeah. And what the initial amount was that they committed to, and then up now what they've actually put out.
Yes, I'd like to answer the question. I'll be honest, I don't remember those numbers offhand, and I don't believe I have them with me. What I can do, though, is circulate an email to the entire council with a breakdown of all those costs. We can do that here within a week. And that way you'll get a very detailed and accurate answer.
That would be helpful. I have heard that it's 1.3 million, and that initially it was a much lesser amount than that, and that it continued to grow. My job up here is to have a responsibility to the taxpayers. So please understand that. I have a little bit of concern with the amount of other communities that are also looking at this. It puts us in a position of competing for the same tax credits. Is that correct? Am I incorrect, or talk to me?
I understand. I understand that perspective. I do, and there is a reality that that tax credits are finite.
Right.
NAPA only has so many. So all projects, in effect, whether they're ArtSpace efforts or other developers' efforts around the state, they're all competing at that level for credits. It is probably true that ArtSpace probably can't get an award for a project more than one a year. That's probably true. So we will have to be thoughtful about how we work this queue. But in the same way that we've been working in this community for 3 years, it would be our hope to be into chapel with an application the next round, which will be January of June of this coming year. And, so I think we will need to be thoughtful and strategic about how we advance these applications. That Denver conversation is a longer lead. It's probably also not a 9% credit deal. So there are different kinds of financing packages that still can advance projects. If we do a project in Denver and it has to do with the economics of Denver and the scale that works, that's going to be a bond deal. It won't be a 9% credit deal, which is what we anticipate here. So there'll be no sort of competitive rub between those applications, even if they went in the same year. The Trinidad deal could be a 9% deal.
When is it due?
Well, I think we went kind of back and forth. This has been part of our discussion. I think we either had to sort of fast track this project or fast track Trinidad. Trinidad's a small deal. It's going to be an easy one for CHAFA to absorb on kind of a tight timeline. In light of the fact that we've had a significant change in our community dialogue here with many new members of the council, we just thought it unwise and quite frankly unfair to ask you to work with us over a 2 or 3 week timeline that we would need to sort of finish negotiating all of these other components before we could do an application. So we have, I think, arrived at the decision that we'll try to fast track that Trinidad deal and get that in this time so it's kind of out of the way. It's an easy deal to do, I think, and then really focus on this project in a thoughtful way, getting all our ducks in a row for the next application.
Does that mean that Lakewood will or will not be competing with Trinidad for those tax credits at the same time?
Would not be.
Would not be. Okay. Structurally, I've had some issues with this, and I think that Scott's question pretty much addressed a lot of this. However, human nature is such that I still have some concerns. You know, ideally, you want people to succeed. You want them to do well. You want them to make hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Agreed.
But if there's really not a mechanism in place to make sure that people do not qualify for this subsidized housing, that's really what it is, human nature for some people is going to keep them in place. And I'm not comfortable that there is not a very firm mechanism in place to verify income on a yearly basis to make sure that folks still qualify. We as a city are getting involved in subsidized housing. And frankly, I think we need to have a conversation if that's really a city function or not anyway. That's for a different time. But I'd like to have data, frankly, on how many people actually leave your housing projects once they make a higher salary. You know, you've heard the expression trust but verify. I'd like some data for us.
Fair enough. A couple thoughts. It is true that that the city participates financially in building this resource. Who lives in it, though, is governed by the federal government. So in the most respectful way, I can say this, ArtSpace nor do any of you really have any control over this dynamic. It is really a function of federal law that will govern. So the answer I gave, I think, is our experiential answer about how this typically plays out. But there is no way, and to answer your question, we can generate statistics for you once the project's operating about who, on the recertification basis, we can give you percentages of who still qualifies under those guidelines under which they moved in, and those that maybe make more than those guidelines. So we can share that data with you on an ongoing basis. But we are prevented by federal law from taking any action on that, or asking people to leave, or creating an adverse environment. Now, the philosophy is this: even though there is subsidy involved, some by all of you as representatives of the city, the majority of the subsidy, of course, comes from the federal government through these tax credits. And the philosophy has been that it is more disruptive to have a process by which people are sort of ejected, if you will, unwillingly, from the communities they've invested potentially years in relationship building. And because the statistics generally bear out that people do tend to move on their own, maybe not in that very first year that they make more, or the second or the third, but in some reasonable period of years, they typically evolve to a different situation. Statistically, that's been the case. So the federal government has never modified the law to be more heavy-handed, if you will, with regard to trying to move people on. So I think the answer would be this, is that we have to comply with federal law. And for all of you, I think you want to decide whether or not this is a resource that you value in your community. Knowing that it'll be imperfect, knowing that it won't always be 100% people that need affordable housing. What you're really, I think, investing in is a workforce housing. It's a resource that's there that will, each time an opening comes available, will go to a new person that needs it and qualifies for it. It's a creative community that will bring vibrancy, I think, and some excitement and some cultural context to the community in a positive way. There's also the economic development component in terms of, raising all boats with regard to some kind of economic excitement and sense of place that I think our projects can bring. So I think those are the reasons to invest, and I certainly appreciate your concerns, and I think there are many that share those concerns. This project's now 27 years old, the tax credit program, something like that. So, yeah, a little longer than that. So probably 30 years now. So the program's about 30 years old. So it's had a long time to kind of settle into what I think is a series of sensibilities about these very important kind of philosophical questions that I think have become generally accepted. So at this point, it'll be very difficult to undo much of that.
Please understand, because I'm asking questions does not necessarily mean I support this or I don't. My dad was an artist.
Yep, I understand.
But they still need to be asked.
I absolutely agree. I give the most right answers I can.
Okay. We as a city council, when we looked at this on December 1st in 2014, politically, we had already gone down the path quite a ways, and a lot had been done, in my opinion, before council really had an understanding of some of these other ramifications of this. So they need to come out. They need to be talked about. Also, I'm just a little uncomfortable with the definition of artists, even though you've listed some of those. And people have work outside of their art, it still is a little vague. And once you get into subsidized housing for a certain group of people, a certain profession, a certain group, it's a slippery slope for a city. And I just at least want to get it out there that these questions need to be asked, and that these are something that we need to be looking at seriously as this city council. Thank you.
Councilor Harrison, Abel, then Coop.
I have some really easy questions, and this is not really a question. I think it's a request of Nanette or future work study. I'm not sure that I'm really comfortable and understand the CHAFA process. So it may not be a discussion for tonight, but I need more information on. So as this process continues to grow and go, I need some more data on that, and so I can understand that process.
I promise that we'll get some of that data updated, and also Metro West Housing goes through this process, so there may be some tag team that we'll do with that. So, yes.
Can I add to that? You know, there is a clear scoring process for projects. So the good news about the CHAFA process, it's not a mystery. So we can probably also provide for you, we'll provide for Nanette, kind of a brief summary of kind of the main scoring goals or targets, the things we'll be measured by. And that'll give you kind of a list of, you know, the more boxes here that we check affirmatively and the stronger we check the boxes, meaning there's gray area in the yeses or nos, the more competitive our application will be. But it'll give you, in fact, that's a really good idea, because I think it'll give all of you kind of a basic understanding of these are the things we're trying to achieve in order to be competitive for those credits.
I want to follow up because that's been staff's due diligence and discussion over the past month, and that was weighing on our minds of when do we bring this to City Council? What does it look like? Because one of the biggest things as part of the CHAFA process is defining site control. And that's a clarification that I've been trying to be very clear and work with ArtSpace on. What does site control mean? And it is almost to the point that we have negotiated deal on the land. And with that, it was almost impossible for me to recommend coming forward to you and ask you to make that decision. That would have needed to happen weeks ago. So that they could proceed with the application process. And that was a very key decision. Then the other thing is there's other projects within Lakewood that will be looking for tax credits too this year. And so it was the competitiveness even internal to our city. Had some discussion a few months ago with CHAFA to understand how do they look at this project and in fair with the other projects, and what's the likelihood that we would be successful. And it's not that we won't be successful, it's how many are in the pipeline, and then how much they can spread the peanut butter across the state. And that lend itself to us to have this honest discussion, go slower, have a better project, and have a successful application.
Good. All right. Councilor Abel, Coop, Vincent.
I have a couple of questions, and then I'll save my main concern, which is dollars, for later. Some CHAFA processes have a public hearing component in the beginning. Does this have a public hearing component or a public meeting component where you assemble the neighbors and discuss the project?
There are two CHAFA programs this year. There's the new state affordable housing tax credit, and that requirement for the public hearing only applies to the state affordable housing tax credit. It's not a requirement for the competitive federal credit that they administer.
We recently had a project about a low-income housing project that involved federal dollars that had that component. You mentioned the federal government won't allow us to apply a means test. I believe the federal government applies a means test to a number of their housing programs. Low income and affordable income housing is tied to a very specific percentage of your income going to housing costs. So if the federal government does that, how do they separate that philosophy from the philosophy you just attributed to them of?
It's the same philosophy, believe it or not. I mean, there is a clear test with regard to income limits to qualify to move into the housing. And while there is a requirement to recertify your income every year, there is not a requirement, nor even, quite frankly, a way under fair housing to ask people to leave if they become, quote unquote, over income. And this is what I was wanting to speak to. But this is how all affordable housing works. This is how that policy is developed over the 30 years. So when you move in, you got to hit all those parameters. And you have to prove that you do. Each year after that you live, you recertify, which means the government is tracking what your income levels are while you're living in that house as part of their data collection process. But it does not trigger a requirement. This particular Section 42 program does not require that you move out if you become over income for the reasons I described.
Thank you. Now, my biggest concern, on June 6, 2008, we acquired that property for $950,000. It's my understanding we acquired that property for police record storage. There were 3 buildings on site at the time. Later, we had those buildings demolished because they were not suitable for habitation. So we have $950,000 into those, plus the cost of removing the buildings. Today, in 2016, the assessor values our $950,000 property at $25,600. So that to me presents a dilemma of how we assure our fiduciary duty is performed, and the ground isn't worth nowhere near what we paid for it. So how do we work those figures into this equation?
That in itself will be an executive session for direction to negotiators to kind of talk about options and why we look at that and what do we get for the dollars that we had. Thank you, Councilmember Abel, because I've heard of the police building, but it was my understanding on this project it was for some of the stormwater improvements. So I will do some further investigation because I wasn't here at that time. So thank you.
I believe that we found out one of the buildings had been the subject of a structure fire. The damage from the fire and the water rendered it unusable, and the building next door was damaged by the water being used to fight the fire. That later, because of its fortunate proximity to the drainage that goes through there, is that Two Creeks, Lakewood Gulch?
Dry Creek.
We needed some stormwater remediation for the RTD project. And we were lucky enough to own a piece of property that fell right in there where we could put in some storm drainage work and fulfill part of our obligation for our attributable share of the West Line expenses. So I believe that was the original reason, was records storage. But
thank you. Yeah.
Sure.
We'll get back with you.
Thank you. Is that it? Charlie? Done?
Done.
Councilor Coop, Vincent Franks.
Thank you, Mayor. I would actually don't have a question, but a request. I'd like to follow up on something that Councilor Johnson has said, and that's the overages was it Loveland project, Loveland, Colorado project, and I've heard those numbers went up too. But in that email you send out to us, could you state why and if the scope of the project changed during the process? Is that being the reason that the amounts changed?
Absolutely. I'll try to put together a little narrative. What I can say is this is an interesting question because it doesn't really align with my memory. And these projects are always sort of a collaborative work. In other words, you start a process in this pre-development phase. There are many unknowns. So it's interesting to me what happens sometimes, because if the idea was we were involved in a pre-development contract And in that pre-development contract, we undertook a series of due diligence to try to determine the feasibility of a project. In the process then, part of doing that creates a financial model. We arrived and developed a financial model. And that financial model may say that if we use 9% tax credits from CHAFA and we use this source and we find this much philanthropic money because we've tested that market and we think this is an achievable goal, and we do all of these things, it may also say that we would need the City of Loveland to apply so many of their home funds. And we may need them to participate in some other fashions with regard to donation of land or other kinds of services. There's never a point where this is, oh, we're surprised after the fact when we thought we had an agreement. That shouldn't be the sense about this. And what I send you won't have that sense. It won't say, oh, we had X overruns. What it will describe is that we had a pre-development contract. That due diligence feasibility arrived us at this potential plan, which then had to get funded by all those involved. The philanthropic partners had to agree to that level of participation. The City of Loveland had to agree to their participation in their piece, as did CHAFA, as did our investors. And then the project moves forward. So I struggle with the framework, I guess, a little of this question. And I certainly understand how that can get said in a casual way in conversations. Oh, it was this much pre-development money, but in the end we spent this much. And that implies a certain problem. But I don't view it as a problem. I view it as a partnership with a common goal and a collaborative evolving process where everyone had multiple opportunities to sort of buy in and decide they wanted to continue to participate. And at any point in time, many of those parties could step away if they were uncomfortable with it. And the project either would have not gone forward or it would have gone forward with different partners. So I can better do the specifics of that arc of conversations for Loveland in kind of a memorandum for you. But it won't say, we told Loveland at one time it's this much, and then 6 months later we said it's got to be this much. That never happened.
Yeah. Thank you again. I appreciate you coming here and your thoroughness of all of the projects that you undertake.
I want to follow up with you. One of the staff's due diligence, and it's something that I work with ArtSpace on a regular basis, and it changes, and we're not settled on that, are all these different funding mechanisms that which come together to make a successful project. So there are assumptions that are made in the process, and when we get ready to talk to you about the financial side of it, we'll give you what's our likelihood and understanding of those financial commitments from other funding sources, because I think they're critical in your understanding of the whole project. If I gave you, I'm trying to think, we had 7 iterations on the Performa. One we just started looking at last Wednesday, and the numbers change a lot. And those assumptions are, how do you make it a successful project? They're talking to foundations. How much are the community of foundations are willing to contribute at that time? And it will change, I would assume, all the way up until you make that CHAFA application, trying to show and demonstrate how will this project be funded. Our interest will be, what is it from the city and how has that changed? And I think from the prior city council meeting, it's been very clear to staff that we limit that funding. So, but I just want to let you know, I've seen many iterations, and if I stood up here last week before we had this new Performa, my answer would have been different than if I stood up here today. And that's part of the normal process of evaluating and doing the due diligence on the project.
Councilor Vincent.
Yes, thank you, because I was here. I wasn't a council member at that time, but I was here with the neighborhood support. We, in our area, have had, I know about CHAFA, okay? I know the different credits, I know when, I know how, all of that. So I do appreciate that everybody else needs to be educated on this. I think this is a project that I hope we can come to agreement on the monetary things, and I will need some information on that so I can get back to the people in my ward on that. But all I've heard is support for it, because this is what we've heard that will come when we have light rail coming through. And we have the 40 West Arts Project and a lot of passion around that. So I think more for me, what I would like some information on is what are those ramifications, if you can provide it. When you have something like this come into your community, an art space project, what are the outside influences that come about because of that? I mean, do your income areas go up? Do you have more millennials moving into the neighborhood? Do you have restaurants? Do you have walkability? Do you have people coming into your neighborhood, like on, I keep pointing to Bill back there, but like on First Friday where everybody came walking through? That is the information I need to get back to my people. Not that project, but what happens when you have something like this come into your neighborhood? So if you could give me anything around that, that would be greatly appreciated.
Let us think about that. What I can say a couple of things, and I'll try to quantify this for you. You know, we do projects in different kind of in neighborhoods that are in different spots, economically speaking. We've done some projects in really very low and very challenged economic neighborhoods. We've also done projects in kind of medium economic neighborhoods. We've even done some projects which we call preservation projects or workforce housing preservation projects in neighborhoods that are already kind of upper income and going that way fast, right? So we're actually trying to, in those scenarios, create an affordable place for creative people to stay in those communities so they don't get pushed out. So we've developed in all of these neighborhoods. What I can say, 40 projects later, is we don't have any projects in a neighborhood that has experienced a decline in the economic status of that neighborhood. Now, whether that, it's certainly not all us, but at least it's a testament to the fact that our projects have never contributed to a decline in kind of the economic status of a neighborhood. And that's across 40 different projects. So I can say that. We can quantify for that. We do have some statistical data that we can share that kind of talks about the economic revitalization in the communities around our projects.
You bet. Good. Okay. Councilor Franks, Gutwein, Johnson, Shakti.
Well, first I wanted to say the property in Loveland, my grandparents' home was about 6-8 blocks from there, so I know the area well, but didn't know your project was there, so I'm going to go look forward to taking a look at that building.
We can get you a tour if you want, so we'll leave a card and we'll arrange that for you.
I would love that. I would love that. A few questions. I want to understand the component about the community event space. Is this project slated to have a community event space? I'm sorry if I missed that earlier.
One of our goals out of the market study is to create working studio and or commercial community space. The zoning, if we continue to move forward with 1290 Harlan, supports and encourages active uses. So we, for the CHAFA process, don't actually have to figure that out to, every last detail. But that would be an additional component of the future community engagement, looking at what the market supports. Now that there are working studios up and running, we have even more data in the area along Colfax with the change in the market. So we'd really look at, now that we have a framework of a building, a framework of what we can do there, parking, all the little details that go into it. But it has been one of the overreaching goals for this project all along to have some active space. Often for us, that means arts organizations, working studios, commercial at a slightly different scale, but that's on the list.
Okay. I was trying to determine if there was going to be anything where the community would get direct benefit, free usage of areas and that type of thing, to see what kind of community benefit there might be at no cost to organizations.
I just want to add to that. We saw a concept, and the concept had some of that in. It's a trade-off on the sites. What we, in doing our site investigation, less land was available because of some stormwater improvements. So when there was less land, the building footprint changed, and so we're going back and forth and looking at that from a programming standpoint.
Wonderful.
But there'll be at least one space. So with everything that Rachel said, there'll be one space that is a collaborative space that's controlled by the artist in the building. What's kind of neat about that space is, as part of the financing, it cannot be a space that's rented out. So by definition, it is a community facility space. And what it means is, while the artist in the building will program events for themselves and for the community at large, through our asset team, we'll encourage and help them get organized to also invite other organizations in the community to hold events in that space at no charge. So there's definitely going to be one substantial common gallery event space that'll be very much a community facility.
Great, thank you. Another question is, I had a recollection about Section 8, but quickly looked it up. Basically, my recollection was that the recertification period was to assess the income, and then at that time, the rent was either adjusted lower or higher based on those. So I was wondering if that component is built in there as a way to eventually, if somebody starts doing very well for themselves, to get them to market rate.
No.
Here's how I've worked in the compliance parts of this industry as well. And the federal low-income housing tax credit program can be combined with Section 8. ArtSpace does not do that work with the Section 8 generally. So I think of the tax credit program as more of a rent stabilization. Rent is set at an affordable rate. To move in, a family needs to prove that their income does not exceed what's considered, a workforce or low income, kind of arbitrarily set. And I think most people realize that at 60% of the area median income. In this community, that's about $47,000 for 4 people. But then that rent is stabilized at a rate that's considered affordable. Doesn't go down if income goes down or up if income goes up. But that qualification process to determine that income that is done every year is very rigorous and well tested as being, kind of foolproof. And it's there for a reason. And if you think of a family of 4 living on $47,000, another $2,000 would mean they were kicked out, and that just is not the goal of the program. So they're not kicked out. There's still a lot of backpacks to buy and a lot of summer camps and a lot of things that people can do on that annual income. So,
well, I know I grew up well below the poverty line, but I just wanted to maybe set the expectation that people in Section 8 just don't get in there and stay in there forever. There's a mechanism to make sure they're paying the proper amount. So I wanted to set that piece straight, that we don't kick people out, but certainly need to pay the right rate. And Annette, this might be for you. What would be the funding source for these additional costs? It sounds like the $600,000 is already. What would the funding source be for these funds?
ArtSpace indicated that in their model, they look at home dollars, CDBG dollars, there's DOLA dollars, there's foundation dollars, and all those type of commitments. I think they're better to speak to it, but those are the ones that I'm looking at particularly are the CDBG, or use of home dollars, because that is an influence on other entities that also do the asks for those dollars.
But any Lakewood dollars? I mean, is there? I'm trying to understand if there's a Lakewood.
No, there's not at this point in time, and I think from staff's perspective, we got clear direction. 600,000 is the cap.
Okay.
I
wasn't here at the time.
That's good. Yeah.
And for those watching, where are the economic development dollars derived from?
The economic development dollars are derived from the lodger's tax, which goes into a specific fund. It's 3% on the hotel room rate within the city, used specifically for economic development endeavors.
And the last question, wanted to understand kind of the level of quality of materials. We have a lot of people in our area who want to see anything new go in be done in such a way that's quality and long lasting. Can you speak to the types of materials that you have used in past projects?
The short answer is, ArtSpace's mission is we own and operate these into perpetuity. So one of the battles we fight is that a lot of states, because these are competitive resources, have caps that they like to implement. And many workforce affordable housing developers don't have a significant philanthropic component to their projects. They typically get an allocation of credits, they get home money or CDBG money from local municipalities, and that is usually enough. They cobble that together and they build the projects on those budgets. You'll see when you look at arts-based projects, and we have pictures on our website, please peruse that as well. Most of our projects have a philanthropic component, and it is precisely because we want to build at a higher level of quality than I think, and I don't mean this in a dismissive way, but a higher level of quality that both will help meet the needs of the creative people that we try to serve, and also create a quality building. We, unlike a lot of for-profit developers, will never liquidate this project. We'll never sell it. We'll never try to make a buck, right? So our interest is to build a quality project that's going to last a long time, that we can, in fact, fund reserves, which we do, and be responsible stewards of that property for very long to come. So what I would do is speak to our portfolio. I would encourage you, if you have a little time, to look at our webpage and look at those projects. But we do build green, and we are serious preservationists when we have the opportunity, and we take pride in the work that we do. We build and we fight this fight. We take on CHFA when they want to limit how much we spend per unit. We're going to argue to raise that limit. And part of the way we make that argument is we say we'll bring our own money from the private sector through philanthropic donations to do a concrete structure instead of a wood frame structure, or any number of things that we'll try to do to improve the long-term quality.
Thank you. That helps. Appreciate it. That's all.
That's a good one.
Thank you. So I guess Councilwoman Vincent kind of asked this, but I just wanted to ask if we could get even there. You mentioned, measurable benefits to the community, and I would love to get more information. I think a lot of that was presented last year, but since we do have a lot of new people, it would be great. And even, I completely believe and agree with my fellow council people up here that we have to be stewards of taxpayer dollars and be responsible. But I also think that economic development of our city and building an exciting future and a place that people want to live and quality of life is all also our role. And so I think that if you could, the more information that you can provide about just money that comes back to the community after these kinds of investments and that kind of stuff would be really helpful. And then I just also want to say that meeting was really exciting and one of my favorite meetings that I went to last year, and the amount of community support and that there is so much excitement about this coming to Lakewood. Or I guess the possibility of this coming to Lakewood. And the other communities in Colorado also want to be a part of this. I think that just speaks to what a great program this and what a great opportunity this is for us. And I certainly don't want to miss it. So thank you. And I'm really excited about, I just can't wait to see it. So thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. I very much appreciate your question, Councilman Franks, regarding quality of construction. I am absolutely passionate, frankly, that as a city, that we need to get the message out to developers that when you build in Lakewood, you build it as though you're going to live next to it. I'm very passionate about that. Also, I'd like to request that our city do some outreach to Loveland and speak with them, speak with some of the council people that were on council at the time. I have some names that I'd like to include in that, get their take on it. I'd just like to see us do some discovery. Thank you.
Councilor Abel.
You mentioned you don't want to make a buck, but obviously somebody makes a buck here. You have to make a living, and can you provide us with some estimate of what your administrative costs are in percentage to the total income? And that doesn't have to be tonight.
Yep. Well, we're a nonprofit, so we're 501c3. So I'm going to answer in a couple of ways. So what that means is we do build into our projects developer fees. And those are anywhere from 8 to 12% typically of the total project budget. Of those developer fees, it's important to remember that they are the first pot of money at risk with regard to any cost overruns on these fairly substantial projects. So often that full developer fee is not fully realized. In addition, we often defer that fee before we even start the project as a way to fill final gaps when we're trying to finally get a project to pencil at the end. These are one of these moving pieces that Annette referred to. So when we get down to the very end, and if we're a little short and deferring some fee helps fix that, that's something we often do. What's left out of that fee comes back to ArtSpace to support the work that we do, not only in this project, but on all of our projects across the country. So there are no, as a nonprofit, there are no shareholders. There is no profit. Any fees that we earn are simply rolled back into the mission-driven work that we do across the country. Staff, of course, is paid salaries, but there are no, there's no profit sharing, and there's no, stock dividends, of course. Those salaries that I'm confident are at or below industry standards, quite frankly, for the kind of real estate work that we do. So those are general comments. I don't know what else I can do to kind of give you some assurances. We can certainly share with you fee structures around this deal in particular, or what's contemplated today, knowing, of course, that's going to change and evolve as the project advances. I can also potentially, share some projects, examples of other projects that we've done recently that show you. What it will show you is that some projects we earn a good fee on, and other projects we earn no fee on, or in fact are in a deficit position to the completion of that project. I'm just as proud of those as the ones that we earn money on, because I think it speaks to ArtSpace's commitment to finishing projects in a quality fashion and delivering on the commitments we make to the community. It doesn't always work out perfect for ArtSpace and our bottom line in terms of our operational integrity, but thankfully there are some foundations around the country that support our work and in effect underwrite some of that risk that we take and keep us afloat. So that's the general narrative.
So basically, the short answer is 8 to 12%, give or take, according to the circumstances of a specific project.
That's exactly right.
Thank you.
Council President Shakti.
I appreciate everyone's questions. I think it's there's a lot in the details. I remember the presentation from last time and was excited about the presentation last time. And if I think about what has changed since you came before, housing is tighter than it was before. There was just something in the Denver Post about how even though salaries are rising, the number of homeless children has dramatically increased. So that's one aspect. And then another aspect is the vibrancy we're seeing in that area with 40 West, but with all the partners in that area, is really increasing. And so we need to look at the details, but also this seems like a fantastic opportunity to build on that vibrancy and to bring extra benefit to the broader community. So thank you for coming and the work you do.
So I'll just close up with a couple comments, and I want to thank all three of you for the hard work that you've done and working together to make sure that we keep this moving. I know there'll be a little bit of disappointment in the community that we weren't able to jump forward this round, but I appreciate the patience, giving some of our new council members the opportunity to have a chance to learn more about it. And I think they'll be pretty excited once they really are able to dig into this process. See, she's already so excited, she's knocking stuff over. But there's one thing that I really applaud you on, and it's this transparency that you've brought before us. I mean, there are some city dollars involved. We capped that You've taken probably a quarter of it, I think, but each deal is different, and the ability for you to stand there and say, we'll do our best to show you, that goes a long way to show that you're a community partner. So I look forward to the future and hearing more as we move forward. And again, I support ArtSpace and look forward to seeing this project happen. Thank you. Ms. Hodgson, I think you have an executive report.
Yes, thank you. I'll make this quick. A couple of reminders. First of all, an announcement that you might have heard already. Lakewood is a finalist for All America City again, which is pretty exciting, and I believe that goes through April 3rd. You can bring your limbs, I was getting there. Your tree limbs, not your personal limbs. Okay, so you can bring your tree limbs to the city greenhouse it's on 9556 West Yale, which is on Yale between Kipling and Estes Street. And the hours are 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. This isn't for businesses or contractors. This is for residents who suffered broken tree limbs from the recent snow. So note that. That's a nice service, I think, for folks, and a place to get rid of that stuff. And I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. And in my 8 years on council and now as mayor, I've never received so many compliments about the plowing job that your staff, Jay Hutchinson's staff, did. So please pass that on to them. It's amazing. I actually save those messages because they're few and far between. So
thank you. That means a lot to the staff to hear those compliments.
They did a great job.
We often hear other than compliments, so thank you very much.
Yep.
I'd like to follow up on that. I've had a couple of calls and a couple of emails. The storm happened on Wednesday. Cleanup wasn't possible on Thursday because the snow was still there. Friday it began to snow a little more, but that was Good Friday and the last day of the spring break for Jeffco schools. So that got us into Saturday and Sunday, which was Easter weekend. Again, travel time, family time. So people didn't get out much to clean up their limbs so far. Now we're in the work week. At the end of this work week, we will have 2 days to pick up those limbs and get them over there before the end of the period, April 6th, you said? 3rd? And I'm wondering if we could give our folks a little bit more time since the holidays consumed a lot of this cleanup time. And the window's getting short to get your yard clean and get those limbs hauled over to the site. Can we extend that for a couple of weeks?
Thank you. We can sure look into that and see what the volume is through the week, and see if it looks like we need to extend that time. We can sure do that. And if we do that, we'll send that out. We'll put that on the website and make sure you have the information to share with your constituents.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hodgson. So now to mayor and city council reports. I want to give the council an update on two different things. One is I just want to talk about our city council work plan for 2016 that came from the retreat, and I'll be fast. What this is things that were agreed upon at our retreat by this body that staff is either going to be presenting to us or is already working on. So this is that list. Policies and procedures document, public engagement plan, housing study, improved document retention, Tabor, small business incentives, Sheridan Corridor, sustainability plan implementation, drones, slash facility, senior services, youth services strategy, ACIC protocols and procedures, fire pit and dumpster policies, slash firewood. And then here's kind of some more things that are people that we'll see and are in the process. The code enforcement, city manager's annual report to council is scheduled. Homeless veterans is something that we're trying to work on. Planning commission, zoning code review, historic preservation, child care, school periphery for sexual predators, and ACI assignments. All the assignments that were decided on have been given to Margie to then send to the ACIC. So you can see that there's quite a body of work for this council to do in 2016. With that said, we have received additional interest in different topics, and beginning next Monday during general business of the study session on 4/4, those topics can be brought forward for discussion, and staff will be directed, if there's consensus of a majority of council, to direct staff to then move forward. So we have a list, and I would encourage, if you have anything else, to please get those to Shakti by next Friday, so then that we all have an opportunity to see what those are, and we can discuss those during general business. That's all I have. Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
I just want to thank you, Kathy, for providing the resource for the limbs. Very appreciated. Thank you. No other report.
Council President Shakti.
My ward meeting is next Monday, 8 o'clock, sunrise, sunset.
Councilor Wickman.
I know it's getting late and I don't want to drag the meeting on, but we have talked for over 2 hours. And I haven't said a word, so I want to take 2 or 3 minutes to talk about the meeting itself. As far as the art space, I think it's a fabulous project. I was glad to be supportive before, and I have nothing but optimism for the project. But I do want to talk about the way we run our meeting. As you know, I'm very concerned about the process. And part of the process is, number one, we don't rush things and catch us by surprise. And I was very concerned about that tonight. I was afraid that we were going to be forced to do something. We did not. We came in tonight. You gave us a presentation, told us that we'd have weeks, maybe months to think about it and make a decision. I appreciate that. Number two, I'm always concerned that we're not letting the people know what's going on. And again, I was concerned that we were going to be rushing through this. We did not do that tonight. We had a very good presentation that everybody can hear. I have time to go back to talk to my constituents, get their input. So if we had messed this up, I would have chastised you. Reversely, you did a perfect meeting. So I want to compliment you. Thank you for a good meeting.
Councilor Vincent.
Ward 1 and Ward 2, Cops Council and Community is tomorrow evening, 6:30 at the Clements Center.
What's for dinner?
I'm bringing potato chips. So we will have that.
Waiting for potato chips.
Yes, that's right.
Councilor Roybal.
Barbecued beef.
No report.
Councilor Harrison.
Oh, for those of you who love a beautiful junk sale, the Action Center Beautiful Junk Sale is this Friday and this Saturday at Jefferson County Fairgrounds. Be there, bring your money, and you will have wonderful treasures to take home with you. The other thing I wanted to remind us, and we'll have Ralston House making their presentation, but watch for the pinwheels. The pinwheel gardens are beginning to show up. And the last thing, I think Sylvie Lemontaine, I'm probably, won the spelling bee again. Congratulations to her. I wish I was that smart. What a young lady. Thank you.
Back to back. Councilor Abel.
Couple of things. We will also have barbecue beef, potato salad, and some dessert on at Cops and Council tomorrow night. Sylvie Montaigne did win. Ramey and I had the privilege of being spelling bee judges at the Creighton Spelling Bee that she walked away with again this year. So thanks for bringing that up. And that's all my report.
Councilor Coop, Councilor Franks.
One request, Kathy, the information that's going to be given to James Mace, I would like to see if I could get that information as well. So that's just a request.
Yes, of course, we'll do that.
Thank you. On the selection committee, I just wanted to kind of reiterate earlier, amazingly talented, passionate people. It was an absolute pleasure. It was 4 hours a night for a few nights, and it was absolutely well worth it. So I wanted to just acknowledge those folks. Also wanted to say thanks to Chief Paletta and all the division chiefs who came tonight to educate us before this session, allowing me to bring up code enforcement concerns and animal-related complaints, so really appreciate that. And just to remind everybody, the second Saturday of each month, we have our Ward 4 meeting, and everyone's invited to attend, and you can get information on the city website. Thank you.
You, Councilor Gutwein.
Thank you. Just wanted to thank everyone who came to the Ward 5 meeting. We talked about community safety and neighborhood watch and how you can get involved, and it was great. And that is all. Thank you.
All right. Anything else for the good order? All right. Adjourned at 9:25 p.m. Have a